1.7 billion years. Intelligence species 103. Meaning of life negligible. But my own past is a mystery.
Penumbra is a trilogy of survival horror games, starting off with Overture, released in 2007, followed by Black Plague and Requiem in 2008. All developed by Frictional Games back before they hit it big with Amnesia: The Dark Descent, the spiritual successor of which Penumbra shares a lot of the same beats, including a fixation on dark interiors, monsters in a state of undress, and a lot of fucking around with the physics. Oh, and reading. Loads and loads of reading. A quick too long didn't read of the story sees us playing as Philip, a 30-year-old scientist bloke looking for his father after receiving an ominous letter from him, which does strike him as a little bit odd on account that he's supposed to be dead, but in any case you figure, seems legit, and hop on a boat over to Greenland in order to go look for him. While there, you also investigate the monsters and creepy secrets buried beneath some hatch you just so happen to find buried beneath the ice. Now, before we get properly started, let's briefly go over the combat. It's pretty bad. In the realm of, I don't know if this is intentional, or if they just couldn't make it work any better and said, fuck it, let's call it a feature. You get a couple of different melee weapons, but they all feel about the same and are about as equally awkward to use. To attack, you need to hold down mouse 1 while flailing your mouse around. Then, if you want to look around while having a weapon ready to strike, you also have to hold down mouse 2 instead. It's so jank that you're better off just aiming at the floor, since you'll be fighting nothing but dogs and spiders the whole time anyway. It's like they wanted to import tank controls, but for the mouse instead of a gamepad, and overall it's just very clunky. If they wanted to make combat any less viable, they should have just gotten rid of it, which in Black Plague and Requiem they did, so I guess they learned their lesson. The gameplay revolves around navigating a maze of bland corridors, solving puzzles while trying to evade whatever monsters are skulking about looking to nibble on your elbows. Unfortunately, the level of quality of these puzzles are a bit hit or miss, ranging from basic tutorials like emptying a box to push off a trap door to teach you how to interact with a physics engine, to the rest of them, which in Black Plague usually borders on tedium with things like listening to the same bloody radio beeping at you in Morse code to figure out a number pad combination, to sitting down and reading through a manual to set up a generator like it's your dad trying to put together a new table from IKEA, to being unable to put together a fuse to set off some TNT until you've read the demolitions book lying around in some office instead of just chucking a couple of sticks of dynamite at the damn thing, since they're otherwise so weak and useless that they might as well be firecrackers for all the good they do. Pretty much all of the puzzles present in the first game are just kind of bad, and I didn't really enjoy any of them that I can think of. They just feel unrefined, like trying to play Simon with the floor vents that'll kill you near enough instantly, without any way of viewing the path from above to get a better idea of how to navigate it. The whole section just leads to tedious trial and error. Black Plague, on the other hand, has some sensible and decent puzzles, like flattening a coin to be used as a makeshift screwdriver to pry off a vent cover, but then it takes a detour back down Balmy Road and has some right mind benders in logic. Like using that same flattened coin to buy a cool one from the vending machine, which, real talk, it's gotta suck to be the guy who has to come all the way out here to restock that thing. And then there's Requiem, which is nothing but these, being basically a tech demo based around challenge rooms to show off the physics. There's a couple of decent levels here, but most of them are just varying degrees of bad. While I do appreciate the way that you interact with the world by mimicking the motions that you normally do, like pulling a lever or cranking a valve, the conditions around doing so are pretty restrictive. That's to say, if you're trying to so much as open a door from an acute angle, you're going to be having a rough time, and it can be pretty much impossible in some cases. Which, by itself, wouldn't be so bad if you have the time to adjust your footing and try it again from another angle, except you're then having to do it while being chased by baddies or in a timed set piece, in which case it just feels like it demands trial and error and is punishing you unfairly for the sake of it. Thankfully, save checkpoints are somewhat forgiving, so you'll usually be tossed back to the start of the section, but it still kind of ruins your immersion when a chase ends early because Philip suddenly forgets how normal people open doors. And while they try to incentivize stealth, it's so easy to exploit the AI that you can basically run past them without any issues more often than not. The dogs may be a bit more of a problem, since they're pretty quick, but then you just hit them with a drive-by pickaxe and carry on with your day. The only notable reprieve from this is in Requiem, since not only did they get rid of the combat, but they've taken it a step further by doing away with the monsters as well. Which I do have to admit is pretty perplexing to omit the survival in a survival horror series. Speaking of the AI though, it's pretty bare bones, to the point that you can easily sidestep the baddies in Black Plague or stun them in place by throwing things at them. If you run out of things to throw, you can also try standing on some object to stay out of their reach while you recover your health, since there's a regenerating health system in addition to the painkiller pickups for when your auto regen just isn't fast enough. I noticed these guys also kinda handle like cars, doing this weird turn thing when they're patrolling. All in all, the basic AI and pathing issues lead to making things decidedly not scary or even mildly dangerous most of the time. Outside of the 2 boss fights the second game throws at you, where you have to juke some giant slug trying to give you the suck, or the super awkward arena fight between you and a umbilical boy in this crate on a chain that usually bugs out and refuses to work properly until you intentionally kill yourself to reset the area. This goes hand in hand with the rest of the atmosphere as a whole, really. It's like they're trying to take themselves seriously while sabotaging themselves every step of the way. Whether it's with the jank monsters that are supposed to be these big, bad, scary threats out to clap your cheeks, but simply come off as being goofy because of their poor AI, or the writing, which is trying to be dark and serious, but then undercuts itself with attempts to be funny. Like the tonal shift when watching the orientation video you play on one of the computers.
Anyway, ill, lightheaded, or otherwise mentally incapacitated, do not report to the
And again later on when trying to initiate an emergency lockdown and it keeps asking you silly questions. Are you sure it's a real emergency? Did you cause it? Are you sure you didn't do it? It makes for a really bizarre juxtaposition that undermines the consistency of the world. There's also some things that are present just for game's sake and further undermine the attempt to establish a serious setting, like random pits that just drop down forever in a hallway, or laser mines that are set up in seemingly random places that serve no purpose other than to trip up the player. I get that they're present for game purposes, but it just feels so out of place when they're trying to come across as a bit more realistic. What atmosphere there would be is also deflated by the series' trend of introducing side characters in each episode that never shut up and keep talking at you. In the first game, there's Red, who comes off as trying a bit too hard to sound crazy and is so verbose to the point of being unbelievable, not to mention really cringy.
My eye has seen our rocky grave extend, and yet you cast away my hope like you would a puppy freshly rolled in its own feces. I hope that your warped sense of morality is better company than I, because now it is all you have left.
Unfortunately, trying to sequence break by not picking up the radio won't stop him. I guess he just develops telepathy in that case. Then there's Clarence, a Brooklyn-sounding voice that rides around inside your head throughout the second game. And while he can be a bit annoying, he's at least somewhat funny now and then, and I'd take anything over hearing Red rant about random BS again.
There's just something about a rusty saw that just makes me purr. Had a tetanus jab recently?
They try to make the game spooky by having everything be dark, but batteries for the flashlight are plentiful enough to the point of being pointless, and on the rare chance that you do run out of batteries, the glow stick is somehow infinite and provides enough light to get by on, all the while looking like you're having a mini rave. What is scarier than the creatively boring monsters is the lack of hand models. It always makes things feel disconnected, especially for some of the cutscenes when you solve certain puzzles, like watching a tiny puff of smoke saw a plank of wood in half, or zooming in and unscrewing a vent with your mind. What? Penumbra itself isn't exactly pretty to look at, even by 2008 standards. It feels so samey, with boring dark mines and industrial interiors in Overture that make them kind of interchangeable for one another. Black Plague is a bit more varied and actually has some interesting set pieces, having you visit some impossible and messed up areas and some psychological trip that are over all too soon. There's also some more mind play that goes on later, but it's pretty few and far between that I really wish we got to do more of that, since it was definitely a lot more interesting than the rest of what it had going on. Requiem does more of this kind of thing, but it's so disconnected from itself and the rest of the story that it doesn't really have the same kind of weight and ends up feeling more like Portal without the portal gun or the funny writing. Like I said, it's a series of challenge rooms with set puzzles to figure out before having you literally teleport to the next area. It's just really disappointing. The sound design is okay and realistic enough to get a pass, but the music is so forgettable that it's not really worth mentioning. What is worth mentioning is the physics itself, as for all Frictional Games, Penumbra is based on the HPL engine which they developed in-house. Being the early years of its development though, it feels super basic at this point, since it has quite a fair few issues that won't get solved until Amnesia, like dogs vanishing under the map, physics not playing nice when colliding with the environment, or objects freezing in place when brushing up against the player model. It's also stupidly easy to exploit by holding certain objects under you while jumping repeatedly. This effectively lets you fly through levels, and you can trivialize a few of the puzzles in the first 2 games, and pretty much all of Requiem this way. With all that said, the story overall was okay, I guess, although it did feel very I am 14 and this is deep at times, especially with the way that characters are portrayed. Even with Overture ending with a to be continued, followed by Black Plague capping it off, the ending itself ultimately felt kind of random. Like, the writers didn't know how they wanted it to end, so they just threw up jazz hands and went, hee hee, Lovecraft. Then the 3rd game works to undermine that ending and invent its own, but at that point I'd already switched off and wasn't really invested anymore. On the plus side, they're all about 3 hours long, so you should manage to get through them in one sitting each. While I appreciate a few of the key set pieces and the atmosphere when Penumbra could keep a straight face and not keep ranting into my ear with one crazy voice or another, I had a pretty hard time taking it seriously given the story, rubbish combat that was thankfully dropped, and the trilogy as a whole feeling like it's drunkenly stumbling around trying to correct itself. In any case, my overall recommendation for the series would be that Requiem was a mistake and should be avoided. Otherwise, you should only suffer through the teething pains of Overture if you really want to play the second one. Personally, I'd ask them to abide by social distancing and keep well enough away. And after playing for all these, all I know for certain is that I really wish I did have amnesia. Hang on a minute.